Hey guys, it's Matt from Cheltenham UK Philosophers. The following is an interview with Mark Solms, Professor Mark Solms. He's renowned for having I'm not going to say physicalist theory of consciousness now, a dual aspect monist theory of consciousness. He has a theory of dreams. He's just an awesome human being, extremely well decorated academically. He also makes wine, and I really enjoyed this. Hope you do too. Hey Mark, thank you very much for joining us.
Good to be here.
Right. I mean, you're an extremely accomplished figure, if I may say. You got your BA in psychology back in '84, honours degree in applied psychology in '85, master's degree in '87, and that was in research psychology. So how the hell did, first of all, I mean, it's 3 degrees in the space of 3 years, and then a PhD in neuro psychology. You opened in the '90s. You opened the Anna Freud Centre, which is actually at a hospital that I've done some work with before. That's University College London. So that's fantastic. That's a child mental health research centre. You've got a theory of consciousness, theory of dreams. You make wine. Apparently, you're the perfect dinner party guest. So if you're ever in the area, just please do look us up. And so I suppose first question really is, how did you get to where you are today? I mean, what sort of sparked your interest in psychology? How did you get into this stuff?
I think what sparked my interest in psychology in general and neuropsychology in particular is that I had the misfortune, or my brother had the misfortune of sustaining a brain injury when he was young, when we were young. So I saw from personal experience and from an early age mental suffering and also how our minds are bound up somehow with our brains. Then I studied neuropsychology and was rather disappointed by how desiccated or sort of reduced was its conception of the mind. It really, especially in the 1980s when I trained, we'd barely fully come out of behaviorism, and we were in the so-called cognitive revolution, which at least acknowledged there is such a thing as the mind, but it had a purely functionalist. It was interested in mental functions rather than mental life, mental experience. There was no interest in fact, one was positively discouraged from pursuing questions about subjectivity, selfhood, consciousness, these sorts of things. Thankfully, matters have progressed in the neurosciences since the 1980s, but that's how it was then. That's why I took what my colleagues considered to be quite an extraordinary step, which was to train also as a psychoanalyst, which I started doing in the late 1980s and finished in the early 1990s. And the reason I did that was because, for all of its faults, at least psychoanalysis takes experience, lived experience, as its starting point. And what I was hoping to do was to bring something of the sort of conceptual armamentarium that psychoanalysis had developed over a century of serious study of subjective being, to bring that theoretical yield into neuropsychology. And in doing so, not that it was my intention, but it becomes a two-way bridge between the disciplines. And so there was also an opportunity to develop psychoanalytical theories by using neuroscientific methods to do so. The psychoanalytic method, for all of its heuristic value, is not very good at resolving theoretical disputes, in deciding between different points of view about how things work. So that's pretty much. So after I trained as an analyst, I think it was about 94 or 93 or so that I qualified. Ever since then, that's what I've been doing, trying to build a bridge between those two disciplines.
And how's that bridge building going? So that's essentially, if I could just play that back to you, make sure I've understood. You're saying we need a science that accounts for the kind of visceral personal experience and kind of can account for that, as well as the kind of more sort of cognitive brain science. And so in some sense, you're looking for kind of neurocorrelates for Freudian thinking. Is that fair?
Neural correlates, but the way you just put it, it assumes that Freudian theories stand as they are, and all we need to do is find the neural correlates. It's more of an iterative trying to find correlates, finding the correlates don't quite fit with the expectations of the theory, and then adjusting the theory accordingly.
Right. Freud's interpretation of dreams, that's hard work getting through, isn't it? It's like I went through this phase where I thought I'm going to have to start reading source material, like The Origin of Dreams. I'm sorry, the Dreams book, The Origin of Species, and they're really hard going. Freud says some interesting things about dreams. He said that dreams are never direct; they never directly communicate what you need to hear from your subconscious. Can you sort of talk a little bit about that? Because obviously you have a theory of dreams, don't you? And so it'd be interesting to hear what you've done with Freudian thinking and where that's now gone. How have you refined it?
Yeah, I think that dreams are a good place to start in some respects. And not such a good place to start in other respects. Let me start with the latter. When it comes to dream theory, I think probably that's the aspect of Freudian theory that, on the basis of my own research at least, has required the least updating. It's also where I began. I told you I was interested in subjectivity, in consciousness. And in the 80s, that was not really permitted. The only aspect of consciousness that was considered a respectable topic was the sleep-waking cycle. In other words, consciousness in terms of the level rather than the contents of consciousness. So that's what led me to doing research into the brain mechanisms of sleep and the most interesting aspect of sleep, if you're interested in consciousness, is dreams. So I sort of smuggled dreams in by pointing out to my professors that it is an intriguing fact that the unconsciousness of sleep is punctuated, is interrupted, by these conscious episodes that we call dreams. And before I go further with this, let me just say that I told you it's in some ways not a good topic to start with. In other ways, it is an excellent topic to start with. The excellent way in which it's the way in which it's an excellent topic to begin with is that the study of dreams immediately throws you into why it's so difficult to have a science of the mind. I mean, dreams are entirely subjective phenomena. Not only are they subjective, you can't report on them while you're having them. You have to wait to wake up. The dreams are notoriously difficult to remember, so you've got a first-person sort of retrospective, indirect report of what happened, you think, while you were sleeping. So that's the kind of trouble that one has. And Freud went full blast into studying things like that. That's what I mean when I say that psychoanalysis, for all its faults, at least it studies, actual mental life. So Freud did so with dreams and came to the conclusion that if you listen to the dream and get the dreamer to report everything that comes into their minds in connection with each one of the elements of the dream. So it's not just the dream that's your data, but also all the associations that go with it. Freud claimed that if you do that, you find that there's a sort of an implicit structure to the dream. There's the explicit, what he called the manifest content, the explicit remembered dream. And then there's this implicit, what he called the latent thoughts that can be inferred from all the associations. And he says that the latent dream content is always wishful. And what's more, the wishes in question are the sorts of wishes that would make us blush during waking cognition. So that's quite a claim. And Popper, since you're a philosopher, let me bring in Karl Popper. He famously used exactly that distinction between the remembered dream, the manifest dream, and the latent, implicit, interpreted dream. He said, how do you ever falsify such interpretations? Because you can take any dream and say, I know it doesn't look as if it's a fulfillment of a heartfelt wish, but behind that dream, I interpret a wish. And you can do that with every dream. And so the theory stands no matter what. Now, the remarkable thing is when I did my research on brain mechanisms of dreaming, which I did in human beings with naturally occurring lesions, damage to different parts of their brain, I found that the part of, well, I was fortunate to find, quite by chance, that the part of the brain that generates REM sleep, which had hitherto been thought to be the brain generator of dreaming, those patients continued to dream. The localization of the structures that generate REM sleep was done in other animals.
Right.
There's the advantage of being able to do a lot more causal neural fiddling about in other animals than you can in human beings, but the disadvantage is they don't speak, so you know nothing about their subjective experience. So when I studied these human patients, I found the ones with damage to the REM generating part of the brain, they lose REM sleep, but they still dream. And then there was damage to another part of the brain, which led to a loss of dreaming with preservation of REM sleep. So that showed that they're two different things. That was the fortunate discovery. But more interesting than that was the fact that the part that generates dreams is everything that Freud would have expected. It's called the brain reward system, which says it all. It's also known as the wanting system or the seeking system. This is a positive.
So wish fulfillment, exactly as Freud said.
There
He
you
said they
have
were
it.
about wish
Yeah.
fulfillment, didn't he? Yeah.
Yeah. So that made me think, gosh, here we have an entirely different method, studying, it's called the clinico-anatomical method, studying the clinical consequences of damage to particular anatomical structures, and it generates exactly the same finding. And that, when I say exactly the same, I mean it generates a finding highly compatible with the one that Freud arrived at by a method that Popper famously said, rendered the theory unfalsifiable. But if you use a different method, then you can test predictions arising from the theory, and those predictions are upheld.
So what are we doing when are we kind of preparing ourselves for some desire that we seek in the real world? Are we kind of planning that accomplishment or something? So what are we doing when we're dreaming?
Well, I must try and keep my answer as close to the facts as I can. Of course, one can speculate a great deal about what it means, but what I think it certainly means is that these desire systems, the wantings, urges, they do not go to sleep. They are the brain mechanisms correlating with such mental states are switched on full blast during sleep. So that's the first thing that I think it shows. It's that these wishful systems are actually activated during sleep. Why they should be is anyone's guess. All I can say is that they don't go to sleep. And I would link it, if I must speculate, I would link it to the fact that sleep is not a coma. Sleep is an active, a lot of things happen in the brain when you're asleep. And the one thing that we all seem to agree about is that memory consolidation is an important thing that goes on, as it were, offline. So during the day, you experience a lot of things and you lay down memories. Then during sleep, you decide which of those memories to consolidate and which of them to chuck out. You can't remember everything. So that's called memory consolidation. That happens during sleep. Now, that presumably is not something that we feel neutral about. It requires a positive motivational engagement with the events of the day to exercise such a function as deciding what to remember, where to update your memory systems. In other words, where to change your mind and to stick with your previous views. So I think that suggests that there would be some sort of motivational component to the process of sifting through the events of the day when you offline. Another way of interpreting it, though, and I don't mean to say an alternative way, because they can be reconciled with each other, but another way of interpreting it is to say that these motivational urges, which patently, definitely are aroused during sleep, they would threaten to wake you up, because normally what one does when one has motivational urges is one acts on them. So I think that it could be that the dream being a kind of hallucinated action, you acting in the virtual reality of the dream instead of acting in the actual reality of the physical world. So it may be some way of enabling us to maintain sleep while we're doing this active, motivated mental work.
Does sleepwalking say something about dreams? Because that points to this notion that you were talking about there, that we're not really inactive. There's probably still sort of threat detection going on. We can probably sense changes in the atmosphere and temperature and so on and so forth. So what's going on with sleepwalking and things like that? Is that evidence in a way to back up your claim there?
Well, I'll tell you two things. The first is that most sleepwalking, which incidentally happens in kids much more than it does in adults, happens outside of dreaming sleep. And the most extreme form of it, which is called night terrors, you wake those kids up, they will fight you off.
They're dangerous. Yeah.
But when they wake up and you ask them what was happening, they say nothing. I was asleep. There's no dream that goes with it. So that's not a good source of. Ordinary sleepwalking is not a good source of understanding this motivated aspect. But if you, there's another thing called REM behavior disorder, which occurs in various Parkinsonian brain diseases, and also can be artificially induced in experimental animals. What happens in that, where there is a dream happening, is the person acts out their dream. But the interesting thing is that what the animal does, and human beings too, as I say, Parkinsonian patients who've got this phenomenon, is not something neutral. It's not as if in REM behavior disorder, the person goes to their desk and starts writing an essay, or goes and makes a cup of tea.
If only you'd double your productivity, couldn't you?
Yeah. But what they do are intensely instinctual actions. So in human beings, in fact, it most commonly what one sees is rage, violent attacks, sometimes leading to the death of the person sleeping next to the dreamer.
Yeah.
But
it's a famous case, wasn't there, of a bloke who strangled his wife, I think, wasn't there? I think he was actually, they let him off because he could demonstrate that he wasn't in charge of
exactly.
his vessel at that time,
Yeah.
Sorry,
but
go on.
you don't, I mean, in humans, you mainly see aggression, but not only aggression. And in other animals, you see also aggression and a wide range of instinctual actions like stalking and pouncing and fearful fleeing and copulation and
that could be awkward.
Yes, yes. So why I'm mentioning this in light of your question about evidence, of motivation, is that obviously these are the kinds of things that Freud was saying lies behind our dreams. Not just motivation, but heartfelt, pretty primitive motivations. And interestingly, as I said, this is not what we normally dream. The conscious, remembered, manifest dream doesn't involve instinctual behaviors, but
yeah. I mean, I've got something quite personal, actually. I used to have these lucid dreams, and in some of them, I would find myself arguing with other characters in the dream and trying to convince them that they weren't real. And I mean, what's going on with that when you actually know you're in a dream? Because I mean, that smacks of well, it's very interesting. I just wonder what it suggests.
Yes. Well, to put that into neuropsychological terms, I don't know if that's the kind of answer that you're looking for, but one of the main things that happens in the brain when we go to sleep is the frontal cortex, which is pretty much where our goal-directed agency is located, that switches off dramatically. A prefrontal cortex is dramatically deactivated as we go to sleep. And then when we shift from sleep, from deep sleep into dreaming sleep, many brain regions light up, but that part, the prefrontal cortex, remains deactivated. And so we understand that to be the neuropsychological basis for the lack of agency, the fact that we are not in charge of our own mental houses when we're dreaming. The dream happens to us. We do not control the events in the dream unless we are lucid dreamers, as you just described. And in lucid dreaming, prefrontal cortex is not deactivated, or it's relatively it's compared to normal dreams. In lucid dreams, there's relative reactivation of frontal cortex.
Right.
So that's the difference.
Right. Okay. That's really, really interesting. I've got a couple of because I'm a little bit conscious of time. I've got a couple of big questions for you.
Sure.
Do you think you've tackled, or at least possibly solved, the hard problem of consciousness as sort of laid down by Chalmers? Because your reticular activation, sort of the seat of consciousness kind of theory, seems to do that. Do you want to sort of comment on your theory of consciousness generally, how you arrived at it, and what you think the implications of it are for a view of what mind actually is?
Yeah. Well, before I answer whether I think I've solved the problem or not, let me tell you something that happened last year, which was the most pleasant surprise. In fact, it was a birthday present because it happened on my birthday, 17th of July last year. To my absolute delight, Tom Nagel, who really, I think, in his famous 1974 paper, pretty much laid out the hard problem there already.
What's it like to be a bat? Yeah.
Yes, that's it. And so he was the keynote speaker at the consciousness conference that year was held in New York. And he was giving an overview of the state of the field, the state of not the whole of philosophy of mind, but particularly this question, the hard problem. How do we understand neuroscientifically the fact of and the existence of and the link with subjective experience? How on earth does subjective experience arise? How can one give a natural scientific physicalist account of this? And so he said, well, of all the progress that's been made, the approach that I'm taking is the most promising. I nearly fell off.
Oh my God. That's a pat on the back right there, isn't it?
Yes. In fact, he only name-checked 2 people in that talk. The other one was Baruch Spinoza.
Oh my God, are you kidding me?
One of the happiest days of my life.
That's another source material that I struggle with, his ethics. But yeah, I mean, yeah, what a great thinker. Wow. So you're rubbing shoulders with the philosophical elite as well.
Well, I say that because you're asking me, have you solved the problem? And I think for many of our viewers, they would think, oh, for God's sake, don't tell us that you've solved. And I'm saying, well, Nagel thinks maybe I'm on the right track. So as to my own view, I think I'm on the right track. I don't believe that I've solved it, and I'll elaborate on that in a minute. But I do believe that that the most promising approach to this problem that has a realistic prospect of solving it is the one predicated, as is mine, on the view that we shouldn't start as we did, as Francis Crick did when he led the charge, to try and identify the neural correlates of consciousness. Famously, in 1994, he published this book, The Astonishing Hypothesis, and he focused on visual perception, and it's easy to see why. I mean, consciousness is dominated by visual perception. We know a hell of a lot about the brain mechanisms of visual perception. A lot of our cortex is given over to visual perception. And he said, well, if we can find the neural correlates of visual consciousness, then we can generalize from there. I think that was the wrong place to start, and for a very simple reason. Vision is not an intrinsically conscious function. You can see without consciousness, as blindsight demonstrates,
and
but as many
cameras.
other
Yeah, no.
yeah, and cameras, exactly. Well done.
Yeah.
But I mean, even human visual cortical functions like reading with comprehension, recognizing faces, these things can happen without demonstrably can happen without consciousness. So why focus on a function and a part of the brain which is not intrinsically conscious? So which part of the brain is intrinsically conscious? It's the consciousness generating part of the brain, which is the reticular activating system. The reticular activating system activates the cortex and thereby renders what are otherwise intrinsically unconscious cognitive and perceptual processes. It renders them conscious. So the consciousness of the cortex is derived from, it is dependent upon activation by the reticular activating system. Now, if you look, and let me just be clear about, so that system's primary only function is to generate conscious states. And if you lesion that system, even very small lesions, you get a coma. I mean, the lights just switch off. So why didn't we start there? And in recent years, we've learned that this part of the brain doesn't just switch on the lights, as I just said. It's not just a matter of the level of consciousness that is regulated by the reticular activating system. It also has a particular quality, the consciousness generated there, and that quality is affective. It generates feeling.
So it's feeling, yeah.
Yeah.
Rather than cognition.
So my argument is twofold. It's that we should be looking there because that's where the consciousness clearly is generated. But secondly, we should be looking at that type of consciousness because it is the fundamental type. And here's the really important part. You can't have a feeling without feeling it. So here, unlike with vision, which can go on in the dark, you can, like Mary, the famous Mary from Frank Jackson's knowledge argument, she could know everything there was to know about the cortical visual perception without knowing what it is like to see and without it even requiring there to be something it's like to see. But you can't say that of the affect generating brainstem arousal structures. You can't explain what the function of feeling is, what the causal mechanism of feeling is, without it necessarily requiring you to explain why it's conscious. That's because that's what feelings are. They felt. So this is why.
Can you feel without the perceptual input though? So because you sort of turn that on its head, you're sort of saying, well, look, you've got all these perceptual inputs, but they're not the things that feel. The thing that feels is the consciousness. As you say, you can't have feeling without a feeler, right? But what about the other way around? Can you feel without perceptual input?
Oh yes, you can, and that I can without conscious perceptual input. Yes, so that I can demonstrate with reference to these children who are born without any cortex. The condition is called hydranencephaly, and they have no cortex, and yet they are conscious. And not only are they conscious in the sense of being awake, but they are emotionally reactive to stimuli. Wow. So they show all the basic emotional, they show rage, they show joy, they show fear, surprise, and so on. In situationally appropriate ways. Now, how does that happen? It's because all that perceptual information comes in to the brainstem. It's unconscious, but it's nevertheless perceptual information. So these children respond to perceptual stimuli without knowing what they're responding to. They just feel something and they don't know why they're feeling it, and they react accordingly. They don't know why they're reacting in that way, but they are.
So they don't have metacognition. They don't know.
They have no metacognition, no possibility of metacognition.
They don't have the cortex, right?
Yeah. And the same happens in decorticate animals, neonatally decorticated mammals. They they show rage, they show fear, they show lust, they even play, they raise their young, not very well, but they nurture their offspring. No
Wow.
cortex at all. So all these instinctual, emotional motivations are displayed by these animals. If you stimulate, of course, the counter argument, and I've had this counter argument thrown at me repeatedly, is that, well, in these animals and these kids, they can't tell you whether they're experiencing anything. So how do you know? All you're doing is inferring that they're experiencing from their emotional behaviors, but they may just be, they may be philosophical zombies. And by the way, the people who say that have never interacted with these kids. It's extraordinary. You play with and tickle and surprise these kids, and you see the way that they respond. It's like happens with pre-verbal children. You don't doubt that your baby is conscious just because it can't tell you it is, and likewise your pets, your dogs and cats and whatnot. But in any event, that's the argument, that's the counter argument, and that's why I also have to point out that if you take people with perfectly intact brains and you put an electrode, as we sometimes have opportunity to do, for example, in the treatment of Parkinson's disease and in the treatment of chronic pain and so on, you put an electrode into those deep brainstem structures, and what the patient reports is intense emotions, intense fear, intense despair, intense irritability, and so on. So this shows that these structures actually do generate these raw feelings.
That's really interesting, because so one of the problems in the philosophy of mind is the problem of the homunculus, isn't it? And it almost sounds like you're saying that the reticular activating system is the homunculus. So there's, you've got this kind of inner theater sort of view of the mind. And then there's the question, well, what is that being that's looking at the screen of perception? And you're kind of saying, well, actually, we have an answer. And that being, or that homunculus, is located within the reticular activating system. Is that a fair comparison?
Yeah, I think that the way that you put the question earlier inclined me to say, I think that we feel our way into our cognitions and perceptions. So
so feeling is fundamental. Feeling is the fundamental.
So the subject, the sentient subject, is literally constituted by feeling. And I think it starts with, I feel like this. And then it's a question of, I feel like this about that. So there's a feeling your way into the perceptual and cognitive goings on. You can't have objects of consciousness without there first being a subject of consciousness. And that subject, as you put it, you could describe it as you just did, as an homunculus. It's at first, to quote something, to paraphrase the Bible, in the beginning there was the feeling. It starts with feeling, and then it's a matter of what the feelings are about.
That's really interesting. I mean, just through introspection, just looking inside my own private experience, that's absolutely true. You always feel something. Little sort of, your sort of anxiety level sort of fluctuating, and you remember something, and you're extremely subject to that. It's inescapable. So I've got some other questions for you. Right. So can I go to? Can I just tell you what ChatGPT said about you?
Yeah, I'd love to know.
I said, I asked ChatGPT what Mark Solms' metaphysical beliefs were. And it said, Mark Solms' metaphysical beliefs, as reflected in his work, particularly in The Hidden Spring, actually the interesting bit, it says Solms aligns with a form of panpsychism, suggesting that consciousness is a fundamental aspect of matter. Do you? I don't think that's true at all, is it? That's a bloody hallucination, isn't it? You don't say that. I think one of our members, Mike Todd, said that you're a dual aspect materialist. Monist. Is that right?
I'm a dual aspect monist.
Monist, that's right. Yeah.
I'm astonished that ChatGPT got it so wrong, because in the very book that it cites there, The Hidden Spring, I say explicitly, I am not a panpsychist.
Apologies for that. Yeah. I mean, it does say some rights. It says in the Hidden Spring, your ideas revolve around the idea that consciousness is fundamentally rooted in effective emotional processes. So it got that bit right. You know, got an A star for that. But so could you explain a little bit about what dual aspect monism is? So because in some sense it seems like you're a physicalist. You're saying there's a physical explanation for consciousness, right? And here's a physical. We can point to it in the real world. I say in inverted commas. Um, but you know, so what is dual aspect monism, and why are you one?
So dual aspect monism, as I interpret it, uh, let me start with something very concrete. You know, when I wake up in the morning with my eyes closed, I experience myself to be existing, you know, and I think I am Mark Solms, thank God I'm still here, you know, and that's my mind. Then I stagger over to the bathroom and I see myself in the mirror. And I see, there's further evidence that Mark Solms is alive. That physical body
Mm,
is Mark Solms. So the dual aspect monist says that those two things, the body of Mark Solms that he sees in the mirror and the being of Mark Solms that he experiences himself to be as he wakes up, they are two perspectives, two observational perspectives upon one and the same thing called Mark Solms. So they're not two. The dualist would say these are two. There's two types of
mm,
stuff here. The dual aspect monist says no, this is not stuff. This is how you represent
mm,
the underlying entity of Mark Solms, depending on what sort of perspective, your observational perspective, and observational equipment
mm.
you're using to do so.
Yeah.
Now, what that in turn, the problem that arises from such a claim, which I think is kind of like, I mean, I know there's all sorts of philosophical arguments to be had, but to me, as a scientist, it's just common sense. It's just obvious. I mean, clearly these are two manifestations of the same thing. They're not
Mm,
two of me.
yeah.
So um,
But what
I
that one
think
thing? What so as a monist, I think that the claim is
well,
there's just one substance, isn't there? And you're
yes.
so would you say that's physical matter? Is the
Yes, so now that's the big that's where I was leading. I was going
yeah?
to say,
Sorry.
well, if these are two appearances of one and the same thing, then what is that thing? It's not made of subjective felt states, and it's not made of physiological material observables. Then what is it made of? I think what it is made of is the thing that generates both of those appearances is the sort of functional system, the underlying lawful organization of this part of nature called Mark Solms, or for that matter, any conscious human being. The functional mechanisms generate both cause both appearances to come about. So it's an abstraction. I mean, let me give
Mm,
again an easy, ordinary, everyday example. When we speak of memory, you can have a memory, you can experience, you know, that thing that happened. Let's say a frightening experience that you're reliving. And you can look in the brain using the kinds of methods we have today, like optogenetics, for example. You can actually see which neurons are connected to each other, activated at the same time as you having this experience. So
mm,
you have a external physiological anatomical appearance of a thing called a memory trace. And you have the internal subjective experience of a reminiscence. And what is it that unites these two things? It's an abstraction called memory. You know, we have
mm,
memory systems. They aren't the neurons, and nor are they the experiences. They are the things that we infer, the way in which the system works in order to generate these two manifestations. So like a state of arousal of the kind we were talking about earlier, these motivated felt states, they are felt. You know, I feel fear, or I feel rage, or I feel lust. And you can look at the brain and you can see, well, this arousal state is modulating these brain circuits. This one's I mean, it's when I say modulate, the modulation, which is the physiology of arousal, you can see it with a PET scanner or an fMRI scanner. These are
mm,
two appearances the subjective one and the objective one of one and the same mechanism called arousal. And you can explain how arousal works. It works by a mechanism called homeostasis. That's an abstraction. Homeostasis is a deviation from an expected state. So, this is homeostasis this is where I expect to be. In fact, it's where I need to be in, say, for example, my core body temperature. If I move out of that, then you have this arousal of the body called too hotness. It's felt as too hotness, and from the external point of view, you see these brain regions activated, and you see the physiological manifestations of too hotness. The person's flushed, they're perspiring, they're panting, and so on. So a mechanism like homeostasis, or a mechanism like memory consolidation, or any other mechanism for that matter, that is the underlying thing. That we don't observe it, we infer it from both sets of observations. So for example, lightning and thunder, with your eyes you see lightning, with your ear you hear thunder. It's the same thing, same event. But how do you explain that event? Well, you say, well, there's this mechanism called, a difference in the charge between this part of the atmosphere and this part of the atmosphere, and the difference is always has to be, once it goes beyond a certain threshold, the difference has to be taken away, and that's what we call the flow of electricity. It's an abstraction. You can see electricity with your eyes, and you can hear electricity with your ear, but the underlying thing is a mechanism. It's a thing that we understand physically in the sense of physics. And now here's the important point that I wanted to get to. In physics today, matter is not a fundamental property. Matter is a manifestation of energy states. I mean, the famous E equals mc squared is enough to demonstrate, that matter is one state that energy can take. So the fundamental, I say I'm a physicalist. If by physicalist you mean physics, in other words, you mean the fundamental explanation for natural phenomena. Those fundamental explanatory concepts are things in the nature of energies and forces. They're not in the nature of material appearances of those underlying energies and forces.
Those just briefly, those
energies in certain states.
I was just going to say, those mechanistic explanations we give for things, are they more a reflection of the nature of the way we think about the world, or are they actually in the world? Do you think these mechanisms are actually in the world and we're discovering them and explaining them? Or do they say more about the way we think about the world?
I think that they say something about both. We cannot escape the fact that we are using our own mental instrument to study our mental instrument, and the constraints of that instrument will be demonstrated in the inadequacies of the models or the inferences that we are capable of coming up with. But the real bottom line is, what else can we do? I mean, all you can do is take all the data, everything that you observe, make inferences about what you think is causing those phenomena, then make a prediction as to if you're right, then if you do this, that should follow. And if it does, then that's the best you can do until somebody comes up with a better explanation, which accounts for more than yours does. I don't think we should have a higher bar in science for a mechanistic account of consciousness than for anything else. We should just apply the same rules of science to this problem as we do to all others. And the proof of the pudding is in the eating, in the sense that to the extent that you have an understanding which corresponds to the reality, then you should be able to use that understanding to intervene in reality in a way that gives you greater mastery over how things work. So to come back to your earlier question about, have I solved the hard problem? I I believe that affect is an extended form of homeostasis, feeling that what I was just saying to you earlier wasn't just a hypothetical construct. I mean, it wasn't just a off the top of my head mechanism that I used to exemplify what I was saying. I used it for this reason, that homeostasis is, I believe, the fundamental mechanism whereby felt arousal comes about. And now
that would make complete sense. We're an animal out there in the wild. We need to do what we need to do to maintain our certain parameters, don't we? So we have to intervene. Yeah.
I mean, all living things are governed by homeostasis. It's all living things have viable bounds that they have to remain within. So I mentioned core body temperature a moment ago. We have to be between two very, it's actually quite a narrow range, 36.5 to 37.5 degrees Celsius. That's where you've got to be. You can't explore all possible temperatures. You will die. So feeling tells you you're moving out of your viable bounds. Bad feelings say I'm moving away from where I need to be. Good feelings say I'm moving toward where I need to be. And those feelings, not only do they have valence, as I've just shown, they have an unpleasant and a pleasant dimension. They also are categorical. In other words, there's a particular category of pleasure that we call, or unpleasure that we call pain, a particular category that we call sleepiness, another one we call thirst, and they're just not the same thing. They are qualitatively different, which is what categorical variables always are. It's like 8 out of 10 of thirst and 8 out of 10 of sleepiness are not the same thing. They're both 8 out of 10, but they are in different categories. In statistics, we differentiate categorical variables qualitatively for that reason. So feelings are how we register how well or badly we are doing in relation to maintaining homeostasis in a variety of different categories, qualitatively distinctive categories of need. I think that's the mechanism, and which allows us to act voluntarily, because voluntary action just means you can change your mind. On what basis do you change your mind? You change your mind on the basis of whether the action that you're following now is making things better or worse for you. So I think that's the mechanistic function of feeling. That's why this mechanism must be felt. The subject has to register how well it's doing in terms of its own system of values. And the values are given by natural selection, that it's good to survive and bad to die. But remember, it's only good for me to survive. So it's an intrinsically subjective. I mean, the value that attaches to me meeting my needs is it's only valuable to me. So it's not of value to the universe, it's of value to me. So these are things that, these deviations from homeostasis, they are intrinsically valuable, existentially valuable, and intrinsically subjectively valuable, and intrinsically qualitatively distinguishable. They must be. So these are the necessary mechanistic properties of feeling.
So now, could you briefly, Mike? So could you say that consciousness, in a way, is the thing that's orchestrating the decision making of which of those things that challenge your homeostatic position? So I mean I used to try and simulate animals, right, in software, and so that's the kind. So you'd have animals that would run away from certain other animals if they'd encountered them before and they'd hurt them, but then if they were hungry, they might still approach a plant that was in range. So in a way, that consciousness for those animals was the decision making between which phenomena to ignore and things like that. Is that a similar kind of thing?
That's absolutely, the way you've just put it is exactly correct in my view. It is the feelings underwrite choices. The decision making you've just spoken about. How do you make a choice unless you have a value system? There has to be a good and a bad choice, and that's how it works. Yep.
That's fascinating.
So sorry, if I may just add to what
of course.
I slightly got lost in what I was saying there. The thing about the hard problem is that if that is the mechanism whereby consciousness comes about, feeling being the most elemental form of consciousness,
Mm.
then it should be possible to engineer that mechanism. There's a famous physicist, Richard Feynman. When he died, it was written on his blackboard, if I can't create it, I don't understand it. And so I think that is the litmus test because remember, what the hard problem says is that it's not possible to give a mechanistic functionalist account for why experience comes about and how experience comes about. So I'm saying, well, in the case of this type of experience called feeling, you have to a mechanistic account of feeling has to explain why and how it is felt. And I believe this is the mechanistic explanation, but the litmus test is okay, then create it.
Yeah. So you now have to build some AI that has self-awareness, essentially based around that. Yeah.
Yes.
That's really. What do you say, Mark? What do you say to some of the other sort of competing theories of consciousness? So people like Stuart Hameroff is collapse of microtubules. Donald Hoffman's theory that consciousness is itself primary, which is interesting to us as philosophers because some of us are idealists, so we like the idea that idealists like the idea that mind is foundational. Do you have any views on those? Not got long left, so if you can squeeze it into 6 minutes, that.
So there are many theories out there. Some of the ones you've just mentioned, I'm rather sympathetic to. Some of them I'm not so sympathetic to. I actually have a great. I enjoy the company of Stuart Hameroff. So he's a good guy. I like him. But I see no reason whatsoever to believe him and Penrose when it comes to their Orc model of consciousness. There are all sorts of reasons why I don't. The idea that this new idealism, I think there's a great deal to be said for idealist positions because of what I said earlier when I was saying, well, what else we are just trapped in the bubble of experience. What can we do about it? I'm a transcendental idealist, I suppose, but that's just a matter of faith to say that I think that something lies behind my experience and I'm trying to probe my experience in order to ascertain what that something is. It really is an act of faith. I'm not sympathetic to integrated information theory.
Right.
I think that it's too general an explanation. It would require a whole lot of things like the internet to be conscious, which I think is kind of absurd. I also think that information, it sort of reifies information. What is information? Information is an intrinsically subjective thing in the sense that
it's felt.
Yes. It's an answer to a question. You have to ask the question, and so if there's a bag of marbles, and I know that one of the marbles in there is blue, and I know that we're told that there are two colors. And I know that one of them is blue, and another person doesn't know that one of them is blue. I have more information. I'm going to gain less by probing what's in that bag than my partner is, and I will have to take one fewer dip than my partner would.
So information is something that's done. It's something that's done. It's a participatory thing. You can't just treat it as an abstract thing, right?
So it leaves out, I mean, it kind of the idea that the amount of integrated information that there is the thing that determines whether the system is conscious or not. It's like I used to feel when I was a student, when I was saying about the 1980s, I would look at these information flow diagrams about all this information processing going on in the visual cortex, and then I would ask myself, but where's the subject that experiences all this information? Because where's the question asker that is using this information to answer its questions? To me, the question asker is an obligatory. Out of homeostasis, we have to ask questions. How do I get back into homeostasis? How do I get this bad thing that's happening to me that I'm feeling? How do I turn it into a good thing? And so I need to process information about the world. And I have to ask questions of the world and reduce my uncertainty as to how to return to it. It's a necessary consequence of homeostasis. So for me, the fundamental thing isn't the information, it's the questions which give rise to the information processing, and that is this.
So is even doing philosophy and quantum mechanics, is that still, you're still serving those same, animalistic interests of maintaining homeostasis? It's just you've decided this, might get you some food or a mate or something.
Absolutely, but you must remember that this works on a population level, and indeed it works on a species level. It's not so how we are designed, by natural selection. Is what is good for the continued existence of our species. So something like one of the drives that we have is called seeking, which is just positively engaging with what is novel, what is interesting, what is unknown, what is uncertain. The reason that we do that, biologically, the reason, in other words, why this drive was selected is that if we positively engage with what is unknown, then we are proactively increasing our knowledge of the world, which is a very good thing. A world that you don't understand can bite you in the ass.
Yeah, and this is like a single cell just throwing one of its arms out to sort of to sample the warmth or something, isn't it? It's just so it's still that's really
but what I was trying to address was to say things like philosophical inquiry and scientific inquiry too, and so on. They might look as if they got nothing to do with our biological nature, but when you come down to why we are interested in things that we don't know, biologically speaking, then it turns out that it's not that difficult to see why we do all of these things that we do.
We're still managing risks to our homeostasis in some sense. Yeah,
I really do believe so.
Yeah. Do you I'm very, very cramped for time here, but what about this idea that space and time are merely just modes of our perception? So, I mean, Immanuel Kant introduced this. I mean, I think even Plato talked about this with his cave analogy. And obviously Donald Hoffman now talks about this and say, look, experience is really all there is. I mean, how do you feel about, or do you feel that? So, I mean, to summarize it nicely, I feel the cosmos is in us, right, rather than us in the cosmos. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the way you just put it brings to mind a physicist who I think is not sufficiently well known. He's a 20th century physicist, John Wheeler, and his interpretation of quantum mechanics is called the participatory universe, which is pretty much along the lines of what you've just said.
Is he the one with the symbol U with the eye on it?
Yes, that's you. Well
that's
done.
The universe looking at itself. Yeah, is that the guy? Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
So, what you were just saying about Hoffman, I mean, this is not really a philosophical question alone. I mean, this is what is being said in quantum physics about the nature of things. That space and time are fundamentally perceptual constructs. That it's a matter of how one system is influenced by another system. This is why I was telling you about John Wheeler. So that's not a radical philosophical idea. It's a pretty mainstream physics idea. The idea that space is not fundamental at the quantum level, and time it has no part in the fundamental equations as to how quantum mechanics works.
Fascinating stuff. Well, I think we've reached the end of the hour then, Mark. So
I want to say before I know we're at the end, and I'm grateful that you're keeping to time, but because you were asking about these different theories, another one that's I want to just squeeze in here is the illusionism.
Dan Dennett, yeah,
and who was also a man that I really admired and
rest his soul. Yeah.
But I fundamentally disagreed with him on this idea of illusion. I mean, I said to him, and I want to say it to our audience, that because it links to my main shtick about feelings. I don't think it's possible for a feeling to be an illusion. I don't see how, if I say to you, I am depressed, you can't say to me that's an illusion. I can just say, no, it's not. I'm depressed. You might say to me, it's unwarranted, your depression. But it is simply a fact that, I am depressed. The feeling is, it just is what it is, and so I can see why you could argue that a perception is an illusion that looks like a glass, but really it's these molecules and such, and this is just the user interface, this illusion as to what the world really is just my model of the world that I use to interact with with what's really there. But I don't think you can say that's of a perception, but I don't think you could say of a feeling that it's anything other than itself. So consciousness. I will end with that. You see, I'm trying to show consciousness.
That's really interesting.
Is part of nature. It just is. It exists, and it has to be accounted for within the same explanatory framework as we use to account for everything else in nature.
Exactly as you say. So the contents of consciousness, that can be illusory. You can be mistaken about that, as you say. But the feeling of it, the fact that I'm having a hallucination, can't be doubted. I mean, it's fucking happening. Excuse my language. It's actually happening. So yeah, illusionism. Yeah, exactly. That I feel, therefore I am. That's interesting. But yeah, illusionism is that's in the bin for me. Really, it seems like a dead end.
I'm glad you agree that both of us are not illusions.
But Mark, thanks so much. It's been such a massive pleasure and privilege to have you. And maybe we could chat again sometime. But I've really enjoyed that. And have a good day.
I enjoyed it too, Matt. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mark. Take care, man.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.